Hello. This is Eric, and today we will be doing Chapter 6, Tort Law. I'll be explaining it easily and simply, and we'll be covering it step by step so no one gets confused. Okay. Oh, without further ado, it's 10:30 officially, and we'll be starting. So, this is how you'll show up for the test. This is your 5-minute preparation. So let's just say you need your friend to explain something. This is it. Okay. So, what is a tort? A tort is a civil wrong that is not about a contract. It happens when someone breaks a legal duty and that causes harm to another person. So, the person who commits a tort is called a tortfeasor. That's for next time, but just to prepare yourself. So, in a tort, as I said, it a contract is not involved. Simply put. Okay, so the two foundations of tort law. Tort law is built on two main ideas. We have the wrongs, which are society says certain actions are wrong, like hurting someone or damaging their property. Compensation. If someone is harmed, tort law allows them to sue for money or other relief to make up for the loss. Tort law basically identifies a wrong and provides compensation for the harm. So, purpose of tort law. The purpose of tort law, chaos, is to protect people and their property and give them a legal remedy if those rights are violated. For example, if someone damages your car, tort law gives you a way to recover money. So, let's move on to part 2. Damages in tort cases. Damages are money awarded to someone who was harmed. We have compensatory damages to repay the victim, basically. These cover actual loss. So, special damages, these are your medical bills, lost wages, and property damage. And then we have general damages. These are pain and suffering and emotional distress. So, next, we have punitive damages. For punitive, think of punish. Both have pun in them. These are meant to punish the no, the defendant, right? And discourage others from doing the same thing. They're only awarded when conduct is intentional and extremely reckless. So, basically, punitive damages are like the court saying your behavior was outrageous. So, let's move on to part 3, classification of torts. There are two big categories. There's intentional torts, and so intentional torts, you meant to do the act. It's intentional. However, for unintentional torts, which is also known as negligence, you didn't mean to cause the harm, but at the same time, you were careless. So, comparison. Intentional tort involves intent, while unintentional torts involve carelessness. Let's move on to part 4, intentional torts against persons. What does intent mean? In tort law, intent doesn't mean you had to be evil. It just means you meant to do the action and knew what would likely happen. There's something special here. Let's just say you're a person who was hit in the head by a ball without ever agreeing to play a game. Well, that's called transfer intent. If you try to hurt one person but accidentally hurt someone else, your intent basically transfers. For example, you throw something at Alex but hit Jordan. You're still liable. Next, let's move on to assault. Assault, not to be taken with a grain of salt, is when someone intentionally makes another person reasonably fear immediate harm. It's important to note that no touching whatsoever is required. For example, if you raise a fist and say, I'm going to hit you or I'm going to kill you, that's assault. Let's move on to battery. Battery happens when harmful or offensive touching actually occurs. So, some important points. No injury is required. It can just be offensive, can be direct or indirect. For example, punching someone, throwing a drink on someone, or unwanted physical contact. So, this is a nice way to remember it. Assault equals threat, battery equals contact. Let's move on to false imprisonment. What's up, Financial Instruments 101? So, imprisonment is intentionally confining or restraining someone against their will. This can be done by physical barriers, physical restraint, or threats of force. The key point here is the person must not want to stay. If they consent, it's not false imprisonment. An easy way to remember is Harry Houdini. He was a magician who locked himself up and placed himself in handcuffs in a tank of water. So he consented to imprisoning himself. That's no longer false imprisonment. Next, let's move on to intentional infliction of emotional distress. This happens when someone's conduct is so extreme and outrageous that it causes severe emotional distress. Not just being rude, it must go beyond all bounds of decency. For example, serious harassment or repeated threats. What's important to note that is the distress must be severe. Free speech limits apply when speech involves public figures. Let's move on to my favorite one. Part 5, defamation. Defamation is when someone makes a false statement that harms another person's reputation. There's two types of this. Libel, which is written or online, and slander, which is oral or spoken. Elements of defamation. You must prove 1. false statement of fact. 2. About the person. 3. It was published to others. And 4. If the statement is a public figure, there was actual malice. So, fact versus opinion. That's important to clarify here. Opinions are protected. However, false statements of fact are not. Okay, so for example, I can think of one. I think he's annoying. That's an opinion. However, if someone says he stole money and that's clearly false and damages the person's reputation and public image, then that is definitely defamation. Next, let's move on to public figures and actual malice. A public figure is someone well known, like politicians, celebrities, famous business people. They must prove actual malice, meaning the people knew it was false, or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Okay, let's make a comparison right now. Regular people must prove falseness. Public figures must prove falseness and actual malice. Okay, let's do a final recap. Chapter 6 is about what a tort is, why tort law exists, types of damages, intentional versus unintentional torts, intentional torts like assault, battery, false imprisonment, emotional distress, and defamation. Okay, I hope this made chapter 6 easier for you guys. If this kind of review helps, I made a short survey to see what videos or lives would actually be useful before test. And if many people would love to, I would be willing to do a live every odd day at 10:30. Well, everyone, I'll call it a night and thank you for your time. Bye.